So Steve, welcome. I'm glad you're here today. As I said, Steve was the Vice President of Marketing and Execution at Subway. He was responsible for the strategic development and implementation of key marketing initiatives. Also, he had a background in McCann Erickson, a place that I'm quite familiar with, and I know my friend Joe Plummer over here is quite familiar with. He worked on Major League Baseball, Johnson & Johnson, Verizon, among others. And he oversaw the launch of MLB Network, which I think I may not be current on every network that's been launched in the cable universe, but that was clearly one of the most successful ones of recent years. I'll let you speak to everything else. Steve is also very well accredited from an educational standpoint with marketing and accounting, which is perfect for MASB because of the financial bent. And he's also got an MBA from the Stern School of Business at NYU. So how are you?
I'm great, Tony. Thank you. Thank you all for having me. I'm pleasantly surprised you pulled the accounting piece out of it because I was actually going to touch on that. Spent 20 years in the marketing field, but you know, the analytics and the math side of it and doing accounting undergrad really draws me to the conversation we're going to have. And you know, accountability and performance is something that I try to weave into everything that I do, and happy to have a conversation. And thank you all for having me.
So let's one of the kind of pet phrases where everybody's kind of going is real-time market, right? And not too many years ago, you would set a plan, you'd execute that plan, and maybe 10-ish% of it you'd have to modify there and there, maybe a little more than that, maybe up to 20%. But because everything, at least theoretically, digitally can be done quickly, people tend to want big adjustments. Maybe if you could talk for a couple seconds, Steve, about the process now of setting a plan, and then the process of reassessing and modifying, and importantly, what information that you're getting on a regular basis there, and how that feeds into the thought process.
Yeah, in forming a marketing plan and marketing calendar, what products you promote, where you place it, how you talk about it. In building that plan, the depth of information that we're relying on is obviously very significant. Specific to Subway, we're doing consumer trend analysis to understand what are the latest food trends against our target. We're doing market testing to understand how our products performing. We talked about media a little bit earlier. The agency up against that. So we have a significant amount of information, especially on the creative side. We're doing copy testing. So we're building our plan, and then as we transition into real time, relying on the first party data that we have, product mix, understanding what are we selling. We have weekly tracking to understand awareness are the key messages that we're having breaking through, and then relying on social from the sentiment perspective to modify our plans. And you're absolutely right. When we started working together, the percentage of our plan that we shifted, is definitely much smaller than what we're doing today.
Not just because of my stubbornness, right?
Well, no, you're always pushing us to ask, what can we do and what can we evolve to? I think one of the things that I am very sensitive to is making sure we're not shifting too quickly, involving our plan too quickly. And I think the most important thing that we can do on that is really objective setting. And Dave, you mentioned earlier, and I jotted it down because I thought it was a great phrase, the best practice that people aren't practicing. And the idea of objective setting and what does success look like, and using that as a framework to understand, we're live with the program, how is it performing against what we expect it to, and having those parameters are often going to help understand how we're modify them.
So let me throw you into a real life situation, which maybe you didn't experience as much as I did. So a new marketing window starts on Saturday. Saturday and Sunday sales happen. They may or may not be good. And then you have usually only about half the franchisees will send you a note based on the first 2 days of sales. You get that in saying this program stinks. You need to pull it, and you need to go back and say, hang on just a second. What sources of information are you using to make sure that people have a more thoughtful approach, any more fact-based approach to any modifications?
Yeah, so metrics against mix, metrics against awareness. You're absolutely right. you launch something on a Friday and you're getting emails Monday morning, it's, very hard to say, well, how we even see the message, but that's the reality of what happens in practice. I think the most important thing that we can do is also kind of reground in why are we doing what we're doing? So we're featuring this product because we have this intelligence that is going to drive this percentage of mix, this percentage of profitability. So regrounding that while also balancing, here's what we're seeing in the marketplace today.
So even all those facts can sometimes do little when the cacophony of negativity kind of starts rolling. We used to use YouGov, which is it's a good tool, but it gives you a good sample size, but not necessarily representativeness. Did you continue to use YouGov, or what other kind of information outposts were closer to giving you real-time information?
Yeah, so that's one of the biggest shifts that has happened over the past 5 years or so is the depth and the timeliness of getting a real world challenge that we need additional intelligence on. So transitioning to company-led forums, so in keeping it internal, having a base of fans that are open to offering feedback on what's happening in the marketplace, and then also social sentiment. So tracking what is happening, and I think we need to take that with a grain of salt, because obviously the biases that inherently exist with even in individual platforms and Steve's there, but having that information is something that we can pull in a matter of hours to understand, what are people saying about a particular program, piece of creative, et cetera. And then we would also have the opportunity to launch, kind of first party assessment of, we have these questions on the efficacy of our plan. Is this communication point coming through? Should we be shifting mix, and being able to stand up with some partners, or even our creative agencies, which is a great partner and tool that I think, marketers should be relying even more heavily on to get that, that turnaround in 24, 48 hours. The speed and depth of which we can get data has really become evolved in the past 5+ years.
So if you were to look at a plan from, let's go back pre-pandemic, if you were to look back on the 2019 calendar year plan, the plan that ended up being executed was what percentage of the original plan for 2019?
So if you looked at my desktop on my computer, you would just see files on top of files on top of files on top of files with like calendar versions 21, 25, 27. So, I'd say probably, 60%-ish of the plan has changed. But I think, really the fundamentals and the tenets of what you're trying to achieve and why you're focusing on, those stay true. It's the how you're going to market. If something's working, you're gonna extend it and maybe put a new spin on it. But yeah, it's an ever-changing document and plan.
So when you make a change and it's warranted, how do you keep people tied to the right strategic basis? Because there are lots of examples across the marketing world, certainly in restaurants, where some changes have been made that really are not seemingly linked to the core business proposition or the core positioning of a business or brand.
I'm guessing you'll probably bring that out in the afternoon session on the CMO relationship, as well as those having the organizational alignment to what are we trying to achieve. What are the key strategic pillars of the organization? How does marketing support that? So what are the pillars that we support? And then how are we going to? Those should be conversations that we're having months and years out of the plan. And to me, always tying back to those core tenets, how we go to market, what we might feature, how we talk about it. Those can definitely change, but is it strategically sound? And I think that we can build those relationships in the role of the CMO. That's one of those.
So you said we could use the tuna story as an example of how you kind of assess and respond to things. Do you want to go into a little background on that, even though it was a difficult circumstance?
Yeah, definitely want to respect some confidentiality, but I'll talk about what's kind of been out in the press of, this story comes to bear, the really erroneous one that the courts have found and ruled on. But a lawsuit comes through on the quality of the product and the origin of it. And being able to quickly go to market through digital, kind of reposition offers to get folks to come in and try that product, and doing it in a way, in a voice that, is kind of tongue in cheek to really owning, the fact that the product is real and it's, one of the organization's best sellers. Being able to do that quickly, I don't think it's something that historically we might not have been able to do. To turn around a TV spot and put it out there, probably would have taken a matter of weeks versus in today's world, being able to recognize a conversation, understand how it's happening socially, and being able to put a digital response in place in a matter of 24 hours. I think it's a great shift.
And so what sort of measurement did you do about the efficacy of that effort? Did you just put it out there and go, or did you factor that into specific questions and tracking, or what other tools did you use?
Yeah, so we have weekly tracking metrics that talk about look at specific messages, but also kind of overall brand kind of affinity and feeling. So that would be largely where we're tracking it, in addition to e-commerce transactions. That's one of the significant shifts that have happened in the QSR space as a result of COVID, is the launch of, or the significant growth of e-commerce, and having, seeing your e-commerce business, triple or more, gives marketers that first party information of additional depth of transactions, understanding what are people buying, when are they ordering, what are they getting. So that was another piece of, if that had happened, 4 or 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, just having that e-commerce business piece give us that much more intelligence really helped.
Well, the app was 12 years in development.
Sorry, I think that's
coming any day now. So let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about some other things that are happening. So that burger enterprise I mentioned in the Midwest had phenomenal success with a fellow by the name of Travis Scott. They did a Travis Scott meal, and it succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. They've been trying to replicate that with all sorts of other artists. As a matter of fact, this week, I guess they don't understand the difference between Travis Scott and Mariah Carey, because Mariah Carey appeals to a vastly different audience than Travis Scott. But even I know that. My son would tell me that. So if you were McDonald's, you would run this promotion with Travis Scott. What would you be looking at and measuring? And as you assessed whether or not you needed to say anything about what transpired in Houston, sadly, on Friday.
Yeah, the fact, just to reemphasize what you said, that the fact that they're running a influencer-led program that caused mass outages on particular products definitely speaks to the success, and seeing them do it with other influencers as well. They're definitely invested. They're definitely heavily invested. So as it relates to how would, if I'm in McDonald's, choose to assess if a response is warranted, definitely looking at social and the amount of volume of conversations that are happening. Are consumers linking our relationship with the influencer together? And obviously, it's a tragedy. I'd also rely on what are the organization's strategies against PR and against influencer talent? Is this something that, is it a significant piece of our marketing strategy moving forward, relying on this celebrity talent to amplify particular windows? If it is, I'm probably going to need to a bit more of a supporter role from a PR perspective. Am I a proactive organization that is going to lean into conversations? You see someone like Wendy's does it, and that often goes into conversation that has nothing to do with their brand, and they're leaning forward on conversations. Do I have a PR and social approach that is more proactive versus one that's going to maybe say, hey, listen, we're not, it's a tragedy, we might support on the back end financially or see what we can do, but from a proactive standpoint, we're going to let the news cycle run through. So, also rely on, again, back to what are our organizational strategies and frameworks that we're using.
So you and I had this conversation prepping for this. I would also imagine that McDonald's plans or desires to potentially work with Travis Scott in the future, or conversely, prevent him from going to a competitor, would probably factor into the whole discussion in a very significant way, right?
Yeah, especially in the industry, even beyond just the burger players, the way the chicken wars have taken off and everyone is very out in the social space talking about that product. You can rest assured if you don't do something, then a Wendy's or a different player is going to insert themselves into the conversation, either with simply, a comment or a brand action like a donation or something that they can do to help simply be cognizant of how your competition is going to potentially take advantage, in a philanthropic in a good way in this situation.
So the other circumstance that's very prominent in the last couple of weeks involves a pretty high profile person, and we worked with a few of those back when I was there and continue to do so. So what's your perspective on Mr. Discount Double Check and the fact that he uses Joe Rogan as his medical advisor now?
I think knowing them a Jets fan is just a sore subject. We don't have I think you're just looking for some for me.
Like White, come on.
For me, what's more interesting is their long-term decision about the topic versus necessarily what to do that weekend. So I think it's been published. 98% of the creative that ran this past weekend did not feature Aaron Rodgers. So they made the decision to say, we're going to lean in, focus on Patrick and Jake and the other talent, and kind of quietly not make any public comments, but just simply modify it out. Now you could fall back to saying, well, we wasn't in the game, so maybe we'll use that as backup. And I know they came out this week and said we support everybody's decision. We want everybody to get vaccinated, but we support everybody's personal decision. I think what you would need to do as an organization is look at, where's my customer base? We were talking about if you're in the Midwest, if you're a predominant part of your client base is going to be in the Midwest and have those views that support that choice, that's going to be a decision that's likely going to guide it. For me, it's what is their approach longer term? Are they going to be a bit more hesitant to use talent that is a bit more outspoken, a bit more cerebral, and potentially do things that are controversial in the future?
Well, you and I see it a little bit differently because I think by not running Aaron Rodgers this week, they extended the story. Okay, because at some point in time, unless they sever ties with him, which I don't think they'll do. Again, I'll go on to DraftKings and I'll make my way through that. I think what's going to end up happening is if they come back and start using him, the question is going to be, what did you measure? Why did you resume? Which makes this story have a much longer arc, which I think adds more risk to it, right? So if it had been me, I would have run some commercials with Aaron Rodgers this weekend, right? And I was actually asked by one of the writers covering it, how do you think about this? I'm like, if you don't like the action, you should stay away from the big time people, right? Because there's always going to be stories about that, especially with social media. I said I would have run Aaron Rodgers this past weekend. And the reason I would have run it is it's just like the Super Bowl. You're telling people to tune in and watch the advertising. Everybody wants to know whether or not you're running the advertising. People are going to talk about, hey, they had Aaron Rodgers, even though he's not playing this weekend, even though there's the whole controversy about him being, quote unquote, immunized, right? So why not benefit from that, number one, and not be afraid? But my guess is, everybody, especially the middle management types, they're going to be highly conservative and reluctant to take any risk, and that's why they did what they did. I think they missed an opportunity to create more conversation. By the way, they have wonderful commercial with Patrick Mahomes, being a guy in a Foot Locker-like place. They have all this other stuff, and they could have done polls online, which commercial did you like best, who looked better in the commercial with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, they could have done all of that, but you got to be willing to take some of the flack. But the whole notion that you're not going to get some negative commentary, especially with social media, I mean, that's not the way the world is anymore.
Yeah, that's definitely, you're talking about being conservative and just what are the organizational values.
Right.
And, I'm sure we'll get to this after in the CMO relationship of in marketing, we tend to be, more proactive, more aggressive, and to lead that conversation and generate that dialogue, organizationally, especially in insurance, which tends to be a bit more conservative, balancing those two points of view is often challenging.
Well, I got to imagine that they're the healthcare conversation. So State Farm is an insurance business. Aaron, prior to last week, came across as a pretty educated, thoughtful guy. And then you're like, what? You said you were immunized. We thought you were vaccinated. Although his credibility took a beat. So if I were them, I would have been trying to find out what kind of hit is credibility taken, and is the association potentially negative for them in the long term? That's the question that you got to ask.
Well, it's the Murphy's Law of marketing, right? Your State Farm, you've got this game circled on your calendar for 6 months in advance between your two spokespeople, and then.
They had so much ready to go for that game that they pulled back. I mean, seriously, I mean, I know this from a few sources, but they had so much they were ready to execute that they ended up chopping. But it was kind of that, last 3 days kind of panic circumstance. Mark, you had a question?
Steve, you actually have a little bit of a real-time history with this because of Marshall Lynch. He's in your commercials, and then he had that faux pas on Eli and on TV. So what was your guys' reaction? Did it even get on your radar?
But not really. I think that's where you come back to, understanding, you bring talent on board because of who they are, and you want them to be, you want to really lean into, we throw out authenticity so much, right? But, you're bringing someone like Marshall on board, and people that he is going to resonate with are going to be exactly for moments like that. So there's definitely, you're going to go online and you're going to see some comments, and, people are, not going to like, what he said, as minor as it might be. I think I saw Eli Manning got 3, complaints in because he flipped the bird, double bird, a couple weeks prior to that. But I think, as marketers, you're going in eyes wide open. And as long as it, is not too far out there with what they're doing, you're more embracing that or celebrating it and looking for ways to amplify it than hide for making a change.
Would you say that you also take into account when you engage these people that that you do the balance, and it may not, and their bad behavior may be good for business because their fans, their people, well, they expect some outrageous behavior or something.
Yeah, we're familiar with those. Yeah, I mean, it probably, I think it's germane to the conversation, right? So, when we first started working with Michael Phelps at Subway, right, we planned to use him. We signed him in 2008, and we were first planning to use him in the summer of 2009 when they had the World Swimming Championships, which he was competing, right? And then, lo and behold, Saturday night of Super Bowl weekend, we got a heads up that there was a photo that was coming out from Michael at sorority at the University of South Carolina. So that became kind of an ongoing issue. And I guess my experience with that was, at the end of the day, you can have lots of people advising you, but you've got to make your own decisions. And fortunately, at that point in time, the only person that I really had to talk to was the co-founder of the company, Fred DeLuca. And I kept him informed of everything we were doing and why we were doing it. There were, lots of people with other perspectives of, dump him or suspend him or whatever. We were actually doing tracking, right? We were actually doing YouGov tracking, right? And I was getting pounded. That came out on a Saturday, and our external PR team, which was pretty good, was saying that we had to make a statement. We had to make a statement. We had to make a statement. And I kept saying, nope. I said, our plans haven't changed. We're using during the summer. I'm not making any statement. Unfortunately, and I came to know the marketing fellow at Kellogg's, but I will always hold it against him, that they came out and said they were dropping him on Monday or Tuesday of that following week, which was basically a falsehood because their contract was up. It just happened to be up there, right? So I'm like, you're trying to look like heroes here by dropping the guy, and you're adding to the story. So I was really beyond disappointed with that on that front. So we kept doing the tracking during the week, and what you saw is, it was a big negative on Tuesday, Wednesday, and then it started working back up. Okay, so his perspective, people were kind of getting beyond it. So then, in the crazy world of media, which Kelly Johnson was here to hear this, I actually wrote a statement sitting in Miami International Airport on Friday night and said, "This is our statement. We'll use it if we have to." Right. So get on the plane, land at LaGuardia, turn on my BlackBerry. This was BlackBerry back in those days, and I had, I think it was 7,000 messages. Okay, and I was like, "Are you freaking kidding me? What happened?" And it turned out that ESPN, we had actually taken, just for business reasons, we'd taken Michael down from one thing on our website. So ESPN concluded that we were dropping Michael. And I called up and I said, you're running our statement in its entirety on the bottom scroll to refute your mistake. And it better be up there. I said, I'm at LaGuardia now. I'll be at my apartment in 20 minutes. I better see it. And sure enough, the statement ran in. And it's one of those things where you kind of, your mind is very focused because it's a very difficult circumstance, right? But based on the data that we had gotten, the statement was, I think I can even do it verbatim. Like most Americans, we were disappointed in Michael Phelps' behavior. Also, like most Americans, we have chosen to forgive him. We look forward to working with him as planned later this year. Conversation, right? And you talk to Peter Carlisle, who's Michael's agent, who sent me thank you. That basically stopped the conversation, right? So that whole week from Saturday night through that day, this had been fluxing back and forth, but that kind of stopped the conversation. In hindsight, for me, looking back on that, I kind of was spoiled by that because I don't think we could have done a better job of dealing with that circumstance. But it didn't, when Paul and Steve, you guys can jump in, but it didn't make us more fearful, but it made us more knowledgeable of the level of risks. But if you're not taking some risks in marketing, you're not going to succeed, right? So when you watch these things play out now, you're like, if I couldn't have done that if Fred DeLuca didn't say, Tony, I'm good with what you're doing, right? So back to the CMO role conversation, right? Even though he was also getting pressure from other people in the group. So, there is data there. We've talked about YouGov a couple times. I was happy to have that data, but that data was somewhat limited. Are there any other real-time things that you're using now in terms of measurement that you have a high degree of confidence in?
I'll come back to more social straight on high degree of confidence with a caveat that, we're never short with data. I think where the challenge is the context around the data. So you mentioned Marshawn Lynch earlier, which is a great example. And you could have someone come running over and say, there's 1,000 comments about what Marshawn said. Is that a lot? Is that a little? And without the context of, how does that compare to who we worked with in the past? Without that context, so I think that there's definitely more data there. I think what we could do a better job is get a handling on putting it into perspective and really truly making it actionable. Because you're right, if you're an organization where you don't have that type of alignment with leadership to say, we're gonna lean forward, any number can seem like a big number. Any number can seem like a reason to taper your plans and be more conservative.
Well, you also, you don't want to get ahead of where the values of the vast majority are, right? But if that thing with Phelps happened now, like, what's the big deal? Marijuana's legal, right? I didn't want to say it, right? But it's, we didn't like it, but it wasn't. So.
And reminding me completely, as you guys were talking about this, I was reliving the Phelps thing exactly what Tony said, because I landed to the same number of messages. But I think what is important in what you were both saying is like, what's the strategy going forward? I mean, we lived it, we came up with it, is we had plans for him for years, for many years. And, having worked on the deal with Tony and signing the deal, this was the beginning of a multi-year relationship. And if you think about it, if you didn't do what you did and you didn't have the approach and you weren't ready, we could have destroyed what became a decade-long, really 8-year plus relationship that we had with him that was wildly successful.
Well, that's, so people play fantasy sports. I play fantasy marketing, right? So I'm like, if McDonald's was smart, they would have done something about the Travis Scott thing, right? Because even if they don't think they're going to work with him in the future, it would be tremendously detrimental to their business if somebody else in the category did work with him. And he clearly has shown his power and magnetism in terms of bringing in business. So I think strategically, in my opinion, they should have done something. But that's
okay. And done what? You said done something.
I would have said they're going to pay for the funerals of the people who perished, right? Or something else to support the people in that circumstance, right? Again, you don't want to get into religion and everything else there, but there should be something.
another concert.
Yeah,
You see another concert, virtual or,
Right,
you know.
You gotta do something there rather than leave that thing out there. I know that, Live Nation is being sued and he's being sued and all that kind of stuff. If you wait for the resolution of that, in my opinion, you're too late.
And you talk about, the future value of brands,
Right.
value of brands,
Financial.
financial value of brands, so that's an action that they could have taken that isn't about short-term sales, but it's an investment. It doesn't need to be necessarily a significant one, given their budgets, that can have a profound long-term impact for their organization.
Yeah, but so having a son who's an enormous Travis Scott fan and who actually went to.
That's great research.
Yeah.
He's always been good like that.
No, but, well, you may not know it, the weekend before last, Travis Scott had a musical event in the exterior parking lot of Citi Field. My son and his friends went, right?
Yeah.
And part of his concert experience is, jumping up and down and being really into it. I mean, to people of a certain age, it's kind of like the 2021 version of mosh pit, right? So there's, supposedly everybody's gonna help everybody, but when you have a surge like they had in Houston on Friday, it becomes a disaster, right? And if you're old enough, you remember, there was a problem in Riverfront, whatever it was in Cincinnati with the that one, right? So this is not the first time this has happened. And, everybody's reaction tends to be, let's stay away from it. But if Travis Scott is a marketing asset that has reaped tremendous business results for you, I think you have to have a conversation in some depth, informed by data and monitoring. Maybe they don't have enough data at this point. Maybe, there's all sorts of pieces there, but if it's just a, glad we're not working with them right now, boy, is that a really short-term kind of perspective.
We have some feedback in the online Q&A as well. One of them is from Brian Jennings, and he said it was great working with both Steve and Tony while at Subway, great leaders. And he said, Steve, however, had us actively, he didn't put the however in, I did, but he said, Steve had us actively in the field checking restaurant level execution. So that kind of brings up a little perspective of activation at a local level versus a national. We've been kind of talking about national, but especially in the case of in QSR and in other restaurants, you also oftentimes have franchisors, franchisees involved as well. So do you want to speak a little bit about restaurant level execution?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian, great to hear from you, hope you're doing well.
Which should use the old John McKay quote. What do I think of my franchisee's execution? I'm in favor of it.
Yeah,
That's not an official MASB President.
yeah,
Are you taking
It's
notes?
borrowing a line, borrowing a good line, come on.
You're trending.
And Brian, you bring up a great point. Shame on me. You talk about real-time feedback in the QSR space, operator feedback. You're often getting that. We talk about you're getting a couple emails over the weekend, but often what's happening in the restaurant, that's what's first bubbling up to the top through communications from the franchisees. So what's moving, what's not moving. Changes we should be thinking about making or amplifying. It's definitely coming up through the field. Both operators in restaurant as well as field marketing teams that are getting out there and know the right questions to ask, what to look for. So it's definitely a really valuable data source.
And that actually goes directly into this next one. Karen Chisholm says, how do you measure the success of celeb-led marketing? Does it play a similar role as TV or different? So going into that thing of, well, how do we just measure success? We talked about long-term in particular. Paul,
I know the question's for Steve, but I've got to jump in. We never use celebrities at Subway. We use fans of Subway who happen to be famous.
We did at the time. I was gonna wonder about, I know it's not Steve's probably strategy, but the whole Tom Brady thing is a whole other thing.
but what are the KPIs for that? Sorry, Joe, this is.
Yeah, it's, using well-known talent is largely the how we're doing it now is largely a creative approach. So I think we're looking at it very similar to other messages we put in the marketplace. So we're not a TV or media approach. No, that's you're measuring it consistently. I think socially you're adding additional things to your tracker to understand good fit with the brand. So potentially getting an evaluation of fit. You think you're doing that upstream, when you're working with your media partners on identifying the talent. But once it's in the marketplace, that would be the only modification I would make. They were doing it a little bit differently, but largely looking at your distribution approach and then obviously sales metrics, those are the systems.
And I'll give Tony credit here, because he was ahead of the curve with this. When we had our own kind of system that I think each of us had in our head, but then we kind of quantified it. And he always would say, what is the social media following of athlete or X potential? And we were just launching our first Facebook page and Twitter page before everything else that's been out there. And that really did help us, because they would be able to, the people that we work with, amplify our messages even further, especially when they were authentic. Right?
Yeah, I'd say the world is different now though. So we were able to put into contractual terms, vague language. Like right now, if you did a deal for any restaurant or anyone, it's gonna be how many posts, it's all gonna be quantified.
Right.
We just kept going to them, right? And what ended up happening is, we'd always bring them something legit, something that was based on who they were, something that they were interested in. And those posts, they could be spontaneous. Michael Strahan once was in a Subway, takes a picture of the menu, tells the sandwich he's having, which was completely his own making. And he said, all you guys think I don't eat here? Here I am. Here's what I'm eating. It's Tuesday. Here's what I'm having, right? Those kind of things are really gold, because they're not being seen by bots. They're being seen by human beings, right? And frankly, all the folks that we work with over the long haul, they would kind of jockey for position in terms of what they did, right? So Ryan Howard, the World Series champion on the Philadelphia Phillies, Ryan would say stuff like, hey Tony, I want to be in this. Could you help me get on this TV show, right? We actually, 5 years later, we put him in one of the last episodes of the show The Office, which was, to use the overused word, authentic. It was authentic because the Phillies minor league team played in spring, right? Okay, so and he had played there when he was coming up the ranks, right? So you put that out there, he's on the TV show, he's happy to send out social media messaging about that. That was all kind of real-time value that we were measuring. How many people saw that? How many people saw the show? He actually had a speaking role in the program, the whole thing, right? So it was me talking to Ben Silverman for multiple years to get that done, right? But when you do those kind of things with long leads that people are comfortable with, they're happy to engage in that stuff. I think now it's much more contractualized. So it's harder to do those kind of things based on everything I've seen. It may be easier to measure based on people becoming more familiar with it, but we knew the value we were getting based on seeing the weekly tracking we were doing.
So how do you think it nets out? Because clearly association with the right celebrity has a potential to add a lot of value to your brand, change perceptions in the ways you want. But now it's become much more risky. So they fall like 9 pins, So, and with the equal power, well, that's the question, the power to destroy value of your brand. So how does it net out? What do your feelings tell you? Should brands be associating with celebrities, or should they be sticking to, I don't know, dead ones like James Bond, who know exactly what he's getting?
I do believe it is net positive. I also think you talked about a little bit earlier, even in the rare situations where it does turn sour, where the brand has to make decisions about a negative action for some of the talent that they have a relationship with, that's still an opportunity to demonstrate your organization's beliefs and turn that into a positive. So I definitely feel like it brings a lot of value to organizations. I keep coming back to it. I think it's something that Tony and Paul did great. Just the fit and being able to, as a consumer, see, I understand why these two brands have, or the brand and the talent have a relationship. I think that's where brands are seeing even greater value from that relationship. But even if there's a misstep on the half of the celebrity, there's still an opportunity for brands to turn that and find them in the way.
Yeah, I would add, I think the equation has changed, right? I think the risk is higher. Unfortunately, the notion of cancel culture has pervaded virtually everything. So if you're not, being, nominated for sainthood or something, if you do something even minorly wrong, you're gonna get torn up. The question I would say, Joanna, is that gonna be lifted back to the brand or not, right? So, somebody does something curious, it gets attention. Is that gonna be detrimental? The thing about the Aaron Rodgers circumstance, which I find fascinating, is when you, even beyond the immunization versus vaccination statement, I go to Joe Rogan for my medical advice. To me, that really kind of knocks down his credibility as a spokesperson for things of importance like insurance. And so I think that's a really hard one to do, right? But then back to Steve's point about, what's the customer experience? State Farm has got agents. They've got agents in a lot of places that are definitely red states, right? If you were to walk away from Aaron Rodgers, how ticked off are those people going to be? Even State Farm is located in Southern Illinois, right? They're going to have a different take on this than somebody that may be headquartered on the coast, right? So all of those things are hard. The thing I would want to add though is, I know personally, I was always skeptical about celebrity, right? I was like, it's the classic, you go down and, somebody says, let's use a celebrity, I'm like, that's borrowed interest, right? Well, it's not borrowed interest if there's a real tie to the brand, right? So the question is, what's the tie to the brand? What's the strategic fit? And if there is a strategic fit, is it something that you can have longevity with? In any of these circumstances, when you get to a negative outcome, it's not just your consumers that are watching, it's all your audiences that are watching. It's, in the restaurant case, it's your franchisees, it's your development agent, it's your executives, and it's potential future franchisees and other folks, right? As well as, if even if McDonald's were never to work with Travis Scott again, there may be some other musical artists that would notice what they did with him during this time, and they would say, that's a company I want to work for, right? And that, kudos to Paul, Steve, and everybody at Subway. I mean, we had a lot of people who, as this developed over time, they said, we watched what you're doing and we like what you've done, right? We think we can trust you, right? Because there's a big trust factor there. And that becomes pretty complicated.
One other thing I would want to add too is, and this was, again, an intentional strategy, and I give Tony credit for as we discussed it. When I joined with Tony in 2008, we were known for working with one individual, and I won't get into that whole thing because that's a whole other controversy. But we intentionally came up with a portfolio strategy of not just working with that one individual, not even just working with Michael Phelps or Michael Strahan. It was Layla Ali, it was Nastia Liukin. For the exact reason that Tony said before, even though he disagreed with what State Farm did, it gave them options because they could dial down one, exactly, and dial up. We did that same thing, but as Tony said, we didn't even have creative yet for Michael Phelps. So we didn't even have to dial down Michael Phelps. We just were able to dial up other things that we were doing in 2009. And that really, really helped.
Well, if you remember, we actually had shot the.
We did, right, but we didn't use it.
We hadn't aired it yet.
Right, and smartly, we didn't have, and the whole idea was we were able to make some of those adjustments because of the portfolio strategy.
Believe it or not,
I just want to add something, because I think there's an element now of brand survival, and this point of not being associated with celebrities. I think, frankly, brands don't have a choice today in the world we live in. I think the idea of being associated with celebrities is really important. And if you look at the case of, because you can also have an impact on that brand itself, the celebrity brand. If you look at the case of Travis Scott versus Michael Phelps, you guys arguably could have actually helped Michael Phelps because at the time you supported him and you actually reinforced his brand, so much so that 10 years later, you can come out with advertising about his depression, right? So it's almost like you've built the mythos around him, you've helped him to build his brand up and continue building, and now he's gone to a whole other level of stratosphere of brand development.
I hope we have good audio on that because I'm going to send it to Peter Carl.
Yeah.
No, I think there's an element of humanity that's got to go be with the brand today, and I think that celebrity component helps the humanity. perspective, because the brand on itself, I think today can't survive just on its brand ethics component.
Well, let me ask you a question back if you don't mind. So, does an influencer qualify as a celebrity in your mind?
No. And that's the conundrum, I think, right? Because there are microcosms of societies around these influences, so I kind of take that back at the same time. It's a very complicated dynamic. I find some of these influences, but then I'm not online following them, right? So who am I to say?
So Joe can look at me askance, because I'm using my kids again as research. If you ask them the 10 most famous people that they're recognized, at least 3 of them for each of them, and they would be different, are people that are quote unquote influencers, right?
Yeah, I think it's really about scale.
Well, yeah.
So, right, so I'm sure some of your kids' favorite, influencers are very niche and targeted, right? So you have gaming as an example, right? So versus Travis Scott, the distribution is really to me the variable, because these individuals have influence, just the amount of people there.
But then that goes back to the argument of the impact of TV, right? Because you've got the scale there, so it's still going to be relevant, and you've got this underbelly, if you like, of minority sellers, if you like, or brands. So it may just be on different levels and based on where you want your brand to be seen in that ecosystem, right? So
I would also say that the standard behavior of following in social media, if you're a significant brand, I'd say consumers of a certain age would believe that you have to have some followers who are high profile. Otherwise, you're not who you say you are.
We just, not to interrupt the discussion, but time has just really flown by at this point. So I don't know if we want to take one more, and then make final statement.
Let's give it to Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. It's really interesting. This is ancient history, but Leo had a totally different strategy, and it was create your own celebrities.
Right.
And and they can get in trouble, but not a lot.
The Keebler Elves and the Jolly Green Giant really weren't going to do anything bad.
No, but what is interesting, I just did a project research project for Pillsbury, and I was part of the creation of the Pillsbury Doughboy, and here we are all this time later, and really moms and bakers just still love that little stop motion character. There's something about it, and Steve, I wonder what's my question is are there barriers to doing that today? Do you think of creating your own?
Geico Gecko.
I think organizational commitment, right? So balancing, short-term sales. I introduce a character, I have to build up and, let consumers build a relationship or gravitate or affinity for this character and individual that they know nothing about. And that takes time. And you were talking earlier about transitioning plans so quickly and looking to modify and how are things performing. Having the gift of time, I think, is the biggest barrier to allowing these characters to kind of seed and grow and become, big equity growth opportunities for brands.
So one last comment there back to the State Farm piece. I think they're actually lucky that they created their own with Jake from State Farm, because he can help, if you'll forgive the football pun, carry the ball while they're transitioning from one to the other. So thank you very much for the conversation. Thanks for coming in. Congratulations on all the success.